A significant shift in the geopolitical landscape of North America has occurred within the last 24 hours, as Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney arrived in Beijing for a high-profile state visit. This development stands in direct contrast to recent statements from US President Donald Trump, who publicly dismissed the strategic and economic importance of the Canada-United States relationship. While the US administration has signaled a move toward economic isolationism regarding its northern neighbor, the Chinese government greeted the Canadian Prime Minister with a full state ceremony, including a red carpet reception and the presence of senior officials on the tarmac at Beijing Capital International Airport. This visit marks the first time a Canadian Prime Minister has traveled to China in 8 years, representing a potential pivot in international relations and trade architecture. The invitation for this visit was reportedly extended personally by President Xi Jinping, following preliminary discussions held in late 2025 between Carney, Premier Li, and the Chinese president. Analysts note that such a direct personal invitation from the leadership of the world's second-largest economy is a departure from standard diplomatic protocol and indicates a calculated strategic decision by Beijing. The timing of this diplomatic outreach coincided precisely with President Trump's remarks in Washington, where he claimed the United States has no necessity for Canadian products or automotive manufacturing. The convergence of these two events suggests a deliberate effort by China to provide a counter-message to the American administration's rhetoric of indifference. The context of this meeting extends beyond routine diplomacy, touching upon the future of the Canada-United States-Mexico Agreement, CUSMA. As President Trump continues to frame the trade deal as a lopsided arrangement that Canada requires more than the United States, the Carney administration appears to be actively seeking to dismantle the assumption that the US market is Canada's only viable economic outlet. This diplomatic maneuver in Beijing is being viewed by trade experts as a structural shift that could alter long-standing power dynamics within North America. The potential for new manufacturing and infrastructure agreements between Ottawa and Beijing has reportedly created significant concern within Washington's trade offices, as the stability of the $2 trillion annual trade relationship between the US and Canada faces its most substantial challenge in decades. The core of the discussions in Beijing revolves around a fundamental realignment of North American manufacturing and supply chains. While public rhetoric from Washington has focused on trade imbalances, the negotiations between Prime Minister Carney and Chinese officials have moved into specific industrial sectors, most notably electric vehicle (EV) production and battery infrastructure. Sources familiar with the internal dialogue indicate that Chinese firms are not merely looking to export finished goods to Canada, but are proposing the construction of large-scale manufacturing facilities within Canadian borders. Such a move would allow products to be classified under North American content rules, potentially granting them access to the United States market through existing trade frameworks, despite current tariffs on direct Chinese exports. A critical point of contention, identified by trade law specialists, involves a specific provision within the proposed investment framework. This provision would allow Chinese-affiliated manufacturers operating in Canada to meet North American content thresholds, a development that has caused visible concern among US automotive leaders in Detroit. While President Trump has publicly dismissed the threat, characterizing the Canadian market as irrelevant, internal reports suggest a high level of anxiety within the US Trade Representative's office. The shift represents a direct challenge to the assumption that Canada is economically captive to the United States, as Ottawa seeks to leverage its G7 status and its role in the Five Eyes Intelligence Alliance to secure a more diversified economic base. Data emerging from the summit suggests that the scale of potential investment is unprecedented. Infrastructure and manufacturing projects currently on the table could involve tens of thousands of jobs over the next 5 to 7 years. For Canada, these proposals include the integration of domestic raw materials, such as lithium and other critical minerals, into a vertically integrated EV supply chain. This strategy aims to resolve long-standing trade disputes, such as those affecting the agricultural sector. Specifically, the Canadian delegation is seeking the removal of Chinese tariffs on canola, seafood, and pork, which have pressured Canadian producers for years. The success of these negotiations would provide immediate liquidity to Canadian farmers, while simultaneously creating a new, long-term industrial pillar that is less dependent on the shifting trade policies of Washington. The long-term consequences of this diplomatic shift extend beyond immediate trade figures, impacting both local communities and the broader geopolitical stability of the Western Alliance. In the Canadian agricultural heartland, specifically among Saskatchewan canola farmers, the easing of Chinese trade restrictions represents a direct impact on operational solvency after years of market strangulation. Similarly, in the automotive corridors of southern Ontario, including Windsor and Oshawa, the potential for Chinese-funded electric vehicle production facilities offers a reversal of decade-long industrial declines. However, these developments introduce an existential pressure point for the American automotive industry in Detroit, as Canadian-made vehicles utilizing Chinese supply chains could potentially enter the U.S. market at price points that legacy domestic manufacturers are currently unable to match. The strategic background of this visit reveals a complex risk profile for the Canadian government. By facilitating a deeper economic integration with Beijing, Canada risks becoming a wedge within the G7 and NATO structures, a move that Chinese strategists may be utilizing to fracture North American unity. While Prime Minister Carney's negotiations may secure short-term gains for Canadian workers and farmers, they also establish a dual dependency. Canada now finds itself navigating a narrow corridor between an increasingly protectionist United States and an opportunistic China. Experts warn that the same strategic leverage Canada currently enjoys could become a liability if Beijing decides to recalibrate its geopolitical objectives once its foothold in the North American market is secured. As the summit concludes, three distinct scenarios for the future of North American trade emerge. The first sees Canada successfully positioning itself as the most connected economy in the Western Hemisphere, serving as a vital bridge between Eastern capital and Western markets. The second scenario suggests a deepening rift between Ottawa and Washington, where Canada is left exposed to secondary U.S. tariffs and a withdrawal of American security cooperation without a guaranteed long-term commitment from Beijing. The third scenario involves an immediate and aggressive economic response from the Trump administration, forcing an ultimate choice between the traditional Continental Alliance and the new Trans-Pacific Partnership. The decisions finalized this week in Beijing will dictate which of these paths will define the North American economy for the next 2 decades.